Welcome to IReb Resistance Radio, where we discuss the resistance work going on in Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District. IReb is an indivisible group formed after the 2016 election in opposition to an executive that we feared was going to do grave damage to our country. As our fears have been proven out, so has our membership grown. We attract people from across the political spectrum, but make no mistake, we are united as a progressive force in Minnesota's politics. Join us on our Facebook page, search for the Indivisible Resistance of Eagan and Burnsville.
Okay, this is our next podcast, and we have an awesome special guest today, our very own Senator Tina Smith. Tina, welcome to IReb Resistance Radio.
Well, thanks. It's wonderful to be with you.
Yeah, it's so good to be on, having you on. We've been doing just a few of these, and so we're just getting started. But I wanted to kind of give you an idea of who we are as a group. We're an indivisible group down in Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District, like we mentioned, and we've formed right after Trump was elected. And one of the first things, when we've been having meetings ever since, and one of the first things we like to do whenever we have a meeting and we have someone new that shows up, is we like to ask them what that thing was that made them stand up and get involved. And I know this goes back a long way for you, and so we're in fine IReb tradition. I'm going to ask you, what was your reason for standing up? What was the change you wanted to see in the world, and why did you do that?
Now, I moved to Minnesota in 1984. My husband Archie and I had just gotten married, and we had 2 little kids, and pretty soon after, Sam and Mason, who are now still living in Minnesota and are both married and live just a couple miles from us. And so we moved into our community. It was St. Louis Park, and I come from a family that was always politically active. Our kind of family ethic was that the first thing that you do is vote, but that's just the first thing that you do. The next thing is like, how else can you get involved? There's so many different ways of getting involved. And here I was, a new mom in this community that I was just getting to know, and I knew that I needed to dig in and start to volunteer. And I did it because I knew that who got elected to the state legislature was going to make a big difference about the quality of my kids' schools and the quality of the neighborhood, whether there was affordable housing, whether healthcare worked for people. It was those basic issues that caused me to get involved. And so I went out and knocked on doors, and I didn't know anybody really. And that led me down the path that ultimately landed me in, one way or another, that's how I ended up being in the United States Senate, starting out as a volunteer and on campaigns. And
you never said no whenever you were asked.
I never really said no. I have just one story. I learned about how to recruit volunteers and how to engage people by volunteer coordinators who called me up and didn't say, "Would you like to help?" They said, "We need help on Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Can you help all those days, or just one day?" And that's how I figured out. You gotta open the door for people if you're the one that's there first, and you gotta walk through the door and help.
That's what leadership is, and I think that's one of the hallmarks of your time in the Senate, and one of the things that I found really interesting about reading about you, and that's what I wanted to talk a little bit more about, your time and how you got there. You were chief of staff for Mayor Ryback and Governor Dayton, and then became lieutenant governor. Can you talk a little bit about those years and how that happened?
Sure. Well, I started out in business. My first job in Minnesota was at General Mills, and then I left General Mills after a couple of years and started my own little company, which I ran out of an upstairs bedroom in our house for a while before it got a little bit bigger. And I had that experience. And meanwhile, I was getting involved in campaigns almost always as a volunteer. And after I was very involved in the last Wellstone campaign in 2002, and I helped on the campaign after Paul and Sheila died, and that was such a heartbreaking year. And look at that.
That's my Wellstone picture.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's a few years ago. It was right after he won his first campaign.
so many of us were inspired by Paul and his message about, what does he say? Sticking up for the little feller, not the Rockefellers. And I remembered that so clearly. And after he died, I needed to sort of take a step away from campaigning for a while. And so what do? I went to go volunteer and ultimately be a leader at Planned Parenthood. And that was not exactly stepping away from the fray, I can tell you, because that is a pretty intense place to work. But I have always been interested in healthcare, and especially women's healthcare and women's reproductive rights. So that was a fantastic place for me to be. And I left Planned Parenthood to go be chief of staff for Mayor Ryback in the beginning of his second term in Minneapolis. And RT and I worked a lot on affordable housing and a lot on youth violence, which was a very significant problem in Minneapolis in that time. And really, our focus was trying to figure out how to talk about youth violence not as a crime problem, but as a public health issue that we needed to address. And it was very rewarding, and we made some real headway. And then Mark Dayton was running for governor, and I actually wasn't supporting him when up through the primary, and yet he won the primary, and he called me up and he said, "Can we have coffee?" And I said, "Of course, and I'll do anything to help you win." And I ultimately became his chief of staff. And that's an amazing, a really interesting job. Being chief of staff for the governor of Minnesota is like being it's like being the chief operating officer for all of state government. 34,000 people, really, really important work on so many issues that affect people's daily lives. And I love that job very, very much.
Well, you seem to be well connected now. One of the things I did look at was all those committees that you happen to be a member of. I didn't realize. I mean, my goodness, do you have time for anything? You've got. And actually, I'd like you to talk about it too. Yeah. So, IReb, our membership, a little bit different than what you might be used to. We're not career political people. We're folks that have just gotten involved in the last couple of years, given how things have gone, and so we want to see what this is all about. We don't really understand sometimes. I mean, is it a good thing to have all those committees? Is that, or are they just dumping work on you? What's that all about?
Well, I will just tell you that it is a really big job to be senator, and part of the job is the committee work. I love the committee work because it is where you actually can engage with your colleagues and focus in on the issues in a really tangible way. It's pretty typical for senators to serve on 4 committees. Some might serve on a few more. So the committee. Like yeah, I serve on 5, I think. Yeah. So here's how it happened. When Senator Franken made the really tough decision to resign, I needed to decide, and I decided to serve. I needed to figure out what committees I wanted to serve on. Senator Franken had served on the energy and natural, and our interests were actually quite aligned and quite similar. I'm very interested in renewable energy and what we can do to move us towards a clean energy future. And so that's why I wanted to serve on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Senator Franken also served on that committee. I very much understood that agricultural issues were going to be a big issue in Minnesota this year. And so I really fought to serve on the Agriculture Committee and was able to get an appointment there. The third committee is the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. So that's where we dig into a lot of policy issues around the opioid epidemic and what we can do to expand higher education and make it more affordable, and what can we do to make healthcare more affordable. So that's a really important committee, and I'd love to talk a little bit about some of the work I've done there. And then the other committee that I work on is the Indian Affairs Committee. Now, this is something I learned about. I really wanted to be on that committee, and I realized that it's not the committee that everybody fights for, like they might fight to be on some of the foreign affairs or something, but it's so important to me with Minnesota's 11 sovereign tribal nations to be able to be their voice and make sure that their voices are heard in Washington, D.C. was important to me.
Well, that was the one that I was actually most impressed with. I was like, she actually cared about this. This is an important committee. I know it is, and I've got friends that actually advocate to it. And yeah, which one is your favorite?
Oh boy, that's like
Is it because of the topic or because they have good donuts?
No, I love donuts. How did you know that?
Oh, because
I'm like always on the lookout for the best donuts. And no, they actually don't have very good food at the committee. Some of them have coffee, some of them don't. But I would have to say that I found the work that I've done on the health committee the most rewarding. In this time where there is so much challenge that we have accomplishing things in Washington, D.C., and that's real, and the battles that we are fighting there are serious and have significant implications for the future of our country. There also are opportunities to make headway, and I've seen some of those opportunities on the Health Committee. Just last week, we had passed out of the Health Committee a big bill that I helped write that addresses the big challenges we have all over the country and in Minnesota around the opioid epidemic and this epidemic of drugs and needing to really treat that as the health issue that it is, not a crime issue. And so some of the proposals that I worked on actually got included in that bill, and they just passed the Senate almost unanimously last week. And I'm excited about that. Provisions helping to expand treatment and recovery in states, expanding especially in Indian country. And then a proposal that I worked on with Lisa Murkowski from Alaska. She's a Republican, but we came together on the really important challenge of getting better mental health services in our schools. So it's rewarding to be able to make headway on those issues.
Well, the opioid epidemic is something I have a personal feeling about. I lost my son to that problem 6 years ago. Of course, at the time, I didn't realize there was an epidemic on our hands and what the cause of it was. So thank you for your work in that. And so along those lines, what's it like to be a senator? What kind of things have you gotten done besides this?
Well, I'm a person who's pretty focused on getting results and trying to get things done. And I will tell you that there are some other examples of accomplishments, and I hate to say accomplishments, but it's really like, what can we do here? So some of the provisions that I worked on in the Farm Bill that have expanded renewable energy, I'm really pleased about. I'm fighting to make sure that those stay in the big bill that gets voted on by both the House and the Senate. Sometimes in the Senate, your victories are the things that you stop from happening. For example, the Republicans, especially the Republicans in the House of Representatives, were fighting hard to put additional work requirements on food stamps, the SNAP program, and I've been fighting really hard against that. It's ridiculous to me to think that a program which is there helps making sure that that mostly kids get the food that they need so that they can go to school and they can learn and they can grow, that we're trying to put, there are already work requirements on the foods, on the SNAP program. So, and, there are so many opportunities to get things done. You can see I'm generally an optimist.
Yes, you are.
But I mean, I'm not Pollyanna, and there are some really serious problems we have in Washington, D.C. right now, and we need to fight really, really hard. The inequity that we have in our system, the inequities around income and health is something that I think about every single day and I'm working on.
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, your message is good, and I have to admit that I've been a fan of yours for a long time. And when Governor Dayton appointed you, I was really excited. It's like there were some people like, well, what? And I'm like, no, this is going to be good. And so I'm excited about your campaign. Now, one of the things, and it's a small point, I was wondering if you could sort it out for us. All right, so, that's my dog Bernie. I apologize.
Bernie.
Yes, I have a dog named Bernie.
Named after.
Huh?
Is Bernie named after my colleague Bernie Sanders? He
is. Actually, he's a rescue that we got a couple of years ago, and his previous name wasn't any good, and he'd only had it a week, and so I was not a big choice to make there. But he gets a little bit worked up sometimes. I apologize. It's one of the cheesier. And actually, I mentioned this to Jen just before you got on the call. This might be the cheesiest thing you do all day, so I apologize for the dog barking. And so, actually, what I was going to ask is if you could sort out the junior, senior senator thing. I mean, what is your status, and how does that work? Freshman.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question. The Senate is very much driven by two things. One is seniority, how long you've been there, and the other is who's in the majority. A lot of people who watch the Senate from afar don't appreciate that it is the majority, and of course right now that's the Republicans, that they set the schedule, they set the rules, they set what we talk about. There's a tremendous amount of power in the majority. And so I am a junior senator with not very much seniority in the minority. And so I have to work really hard to figure out how I can get things done in the short time that I've been there. I was sworn in to the Senate along with my colleague, Doug Jones, who showed what you can accomplish in a state like Alabama when you mobilize people to get out and vote. And I have a little more seniority than Doug Jones, only because Minnesota has a bigger population than Doug's state. And so, it's interesting, I am also the 23rd woman in the United States Senate. Right now there are 23 of us. And so think about that. There, in the whole history of the United States Senate, there have only ever been 51 women.
That's terrible.
I know.
That's just awful.
On this, right? We've got some work to do.
Well, that's and honestly, this is something that I've talked about a lot. We have a resistance going on. I mean, we call it a resistance. It's a stand up and say something when you see something bad kind of movement, but it really is fueled by the woman of this country, and the time has come for equity. And
yeah, I think that what has happened since the election in 2016 is that people are rediscovering the power of their own voices, whether it was the millions of women that marched right after the inauguration and stood up and said, here we are, whether it is the students, the high school students all over this country that are standing up against gun violence and for common sense gun reform. I mean, those are strong voices. Whether it's the teachers that in all of these right to work states like West Virginia and that stood up and said, no, we need more resources for our public schools. Those are all examples of just regular people standing up and saying, I want to be heard. And that's what we have to do. That's how democracy works. It doesn't work otherwise.
Yeah, and I believe that too. I think, the old thinking of voting once every 2 or 4 years is, we can't exist, on that level of participation anymore. People have to work a little harder. And speaking of work harder, so let's get to, all right, so I've got a couple of questions, a little more current events. Yeah. Kavanaugh, I mean, he's in the news right now. One of the things that Indivisible does, one of our, tasks is to advocate to our congressional delegation about these very types of choices. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy we want. The evidence against him seems pretty compelling. What can you tell us about this? Where are we at? What can we do?
Yeah, well, I am a strong no vote on Kavanaugh. I have seen his record. I know where he stands, whether it is on women's rights, reproductive rights, voting rights, the rights of people to come together collectively and organize for better wages and better working conditions. His opinions show that he is going to be wrong and he's going to move us in the wrong direction on all of those issues. I think this is really a pivotal moment in our country, what happens with this nomination. Now, so I welcome, I think that it is also a time where people need to speak out, and it is going to come down to just a few senators and what these senators do. And of course, it looks as though there are going to be additional hearings this week around Judge Kavanaugh. So what I would tell people to do is, first of all, the role of the Senate is to provide advice and consent to the president on his nominations. And we will do that. I believe that the Republicans who are in charge of the Senate are needlessly pushing this forward without doing all the work that we need to do, looking at all the documents that we need to look at. So what people can do is, first of all, don't give up hope on this. It is an uphill battle defeating Judge Kavanaugh, but we don't give up hope. You can reach out to me, but I am right there with you if you oppose this judge. What I would tell you to do is, if you know or think of anybody that you know that lives in Alaska or Maine or Tennessee or Arizona, those are the Republican senators who are so Susan Collins in Maine, Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, Bob Corker in Tennessee, and Jeff Flake in Arizona. Those are the Republican senators who haven't come down clearly on what they're going to do. They need to hear from the people in their states and hear from people. Reach out to those senators and tell them why you think this is important to your life, because it is very important.
All right, thank you. Yeah, this guy, we have to block this guy.
Yeah.
So the next question comes up, the mining issue. This is something that was a hot button issue back in the primary, of course. We have a couple of things going on. The polymet problem, and then more recently we've seen some news. I was kind of wondering if you could just give us a few minutes of, what's going on with that and what you're doing.
I'm happy to have a chance to talk about this. Let's just take first the question of the boundary waters and this project called Twin Metals, which is a project which has been it's probably well over 10 years away, even if it were to move forward at all, that is right next to the boundary waters. And so, I want everyone to know that I, like most Minnesotans, have a strong personal connection to the boundary waters, and I will never support a project that I think is going to do damage to the boundary waters. It's really disappointing this last week, because there's this 2-year review, sort of environmental review, that was started at the very end of the Obama administration to understand the environmental impacts of a potential mine like Twin Metals. And the Trump Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, cut that study short when it was only a couple of months away from being concluded. And I'm disappointed in this. And I think I have a call with Secretary Perdue in the next day or so to try to understand why he pulled back from this. Fundamentally, I believe that Minnesota has strong, rigorous environmental standards, and it is so important that we abide by those environmental standards. We live up to them. They are there so that we can protect this water and this land that belongs to all of us. And I feel that's what we have to do. We have to follow those environmental standards.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate the time that we've had today to talk about all these topics, and you taking time out of your schedule to come visit with IReb. We've got a lot of folks, and we do a lot of door knocking, and so you gave us some hope here, and we do phone banking, and we donate money. And so if folks wanted to give you a hand, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Now, I know I looked at, and now I'm going to see if I can do this real quickly. I'm going to share your site. There we go. And I'm going to share that.
Oh, great. You got my, the website up there?
Yes. So we're sharing your, I hope I'm doing this right. Your smith.senate.gov website. And so this is one way to get a hold of you.
Yep.
And it lists a lot of the work that you're doing. We can see the work that you're working on, some of the things we talked about today, and some more things that we couldn't get to because we didn't have time. So where else would be a good place to
Well, first, I want everyone to know that if there's anything that you need from my official office, if you have an immigration issue or a Social Security issue, or you're a veteran and you need some assistance navigating the Veterans Administration, call my official office, and we're standing by to be able to help in any way that we can. Or if you want to express your view on an issue, please call. If you're interested in getting involved in the campaign, then I'm going to read you a telephone number, and you can call this telephone number, and the number is 651-788-7714. Or you can go to tinafromminnesota.com and get information there. And go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say when I actually we're not as cheesy in the future, I'll actually have graphics for that.
But what I want to say about is that we think about this concept of a blue wave, and sometimes I think we think about it like it's this wave that washes over the landscape like a storm surge, and it just happens. And from all of the years that I've been organizing and talking to people, we all know this. Blue waves happen when people use their voices and they stand up and they vote, and that's what we're all so focused on right now, and I know that you all are as well. It's as simple as wearing a button when you go to the grocery store so that somebody asks you, the person who's doing the checkout, who probably doesn't have time to think that much about politics, asks you about that, or it is talking to somebody on the bus, or talking to your neighbors, or actually getting out and volunteering and door knocking, which I know that you all do so much. All of that is the basic engine of democracy, and we need it now more than ever.
Here's my best graphic.
It looks good.
Yeah, I actually have yours and Amy's.
There you go.
Oh, and then the other thing I wanted to show before we finished, because you're my third senator.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, Al visited school when I was going to college once.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Tina, for coming on. I'm about ready to play the lead out music, and we'll be all done. So thank you very much, and I hope that we can have you back real soon as a guest again.
I appreciate the chance to talk with everyone. Have a great day.
All right.